Okay, so let's take a little tour of CLM briefly. Again, it's not a full-featured demonstration. I'm going to get through this fairly quickly so we can move on to the other pieces. But so in the next couple minutes, I just want to show you, I'm just going to use an example of a simple agreement. It's like a purchase agreement, and I'm going to be able to demonstrate some automated classification and declaration. We'll look at something called lifecycle details, which are the records management details of that item. And I'll just briefly show you the simple configuration of the file plan and retention policies. Again, this is necessary just to set the stage for what you're going to see later. So with that, let me just bring up my, my SharePoint environment. Okay. So what you're looking at here is, you're looking at my demonstration environment. This is a little intranet that I've put together. You can see various departmental sites here, administration, finance. We're going to get into HR a little later. And in this particular example, you know, this is just an intranet environment. From an end user perspective, end users don't really see a lot of Collabware CLM. They see SharePoint, and Collabware CLM kind of watches what's going on behind the scenes and does things to the content. There's another site when CLM installs as a service application in your SharePoint environment, and it will set up something called a record center site. And this is where all the configuration happens. I'll just show this briefly. This is, end users don't see this. This is what records managers see and the people that support them. And this is where all the configuration happens, where you set up your record categories, set up your policies and rules, stuff like that. So that's most of the UI for what we're looking at. But if we go back to the end user experience, so in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a contracts manager, and I'm working with a purchase agreement. So my SharePoint department, my IT department has maybe set up this team site or this library for me, and it's configured to accept different kinds of agreements. So I'm going to go grab that. And again, standard SharePoint at this point. And I'm going to go grab, and I'm going to work with, let's say, like Acme. We'll work with Acme Enterprises today. So I'm going to pull that into my agreements library. And in this process, what I do is I bring it in when it's not quite finished yet. It's still a work in progress. There's a few things I need to do to it. And then I make it a final version, a final copy, and then at that point, it becomes a formal preserved record. But in the meantime, it's just a work in progress. The first CLM related thing that you're going to see is, you know, in this case, SharePoint is recognized. This is an agreement. I've done a little bit of information architecture ahead of time to say for agreements, I want this kind of metadata associated with agreements. And so that's what's been set up. So the first thing that you recognize that's CLM related is this thing called record classification. Now, most records management solutions are going to have a place where users can type or put their records classification code. And this is really your link to your hierarchical file plan and any of the retention policies or anything associated with that file plan. So we can see that CLM has already recognized that this is an agreement, and it's actually classified it to a certain place in the file plan. If we pop out, we can take a look at that. I should point out that this is the entire SharePoint environment, and everything is running off my laptop, and sometimes there's a little lag. So here we can see just a representation of the file plan. And CLM knows that without any additional information, without any agreement types or other kinds of metadata, it doesn't really know what's there yet. So it's done the best that it could, and it classified it against this area called 410.01 General. And we have a rule that says that. It turns out that purchase agreements actually belong somewhere else. They belong up in this other area of financial management. They have a different retention period, different kinds of policies that apply to them, and they also have a different Office of Primary Responsibility to manage and be responsible for them. So it's important, as you know, that content be classified to the correct place in the file plan so that it's destroyed when it should or kept in its appropriate amount of time. And CLM has rules to allow us to do that. So let's cancel that. Let's just leave that as 410.01 General. We're going to see CLM recognize it and move it later on. For you SharePoint people out there, these are not column defaults. There's no column defaults on any of these libraries. This is all CLM rules looking at this, interpreting the content, and then applying the record classification that meets those rules. So I'm just going to complete my my process, my business process. I'm going to add some business data, which is an agreement type. In this case, it's a purchase agreement. I'm going to, I'm not going to give it a date just yet. I'm going to set it to review. Again, it's sort of like a work in progress, and I'm going to save it. And this will add the content to my agreement library. And we'll see it's added in here. It's great. And when we take a look at, let me just refresh that. When we take a look, I've got the record classification field showing in this view, and you can see over to the right-hand side that CLM was already recognized with additional metadata that this belongs somewhere else. And it's actually moved it from that 410.01 general area to purchase agreements. Automated record classification. Let's take a look behind the scenes and see what's gone on. From an end user perspective, the other thing that they see that's Collabware CLM related is this button up on the ribbon called Lifecycle Details. So let's just click on that. And what we can see here, these are all the details related to records management on this item. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but we see a couple of things. We see that CLM has assigned a global unique identifier to this. This guarantees uniqueness across your entire SharePoint farm and environment. We use that for your URLs so that it can follow that document wherever it goes in your environment. We have the full audit that takes place on every activity that occurs in SharePoint. So the date and time, who initiated it, what the action was. In this case, it's just a new document, shows not a lot of activity. And here back, we can see the details. CLM has recognized that it belongs to a certain category, and we've been able to classify it. And because we've been able to do that, we consider this a potential record. So it's not an active record yet, it's potential because it's met the criteria. It hasn't met the criteria to become a formal preserved record, but we've got a classification for it. And when it does become a record, we know what the retention schedule will be. This area down here is also where we can see what the schedule is going to be. In this example, we have a combination of a two-phased retention schedule. The first phase being in place, second phase being a move from in place to the SharePoint Record Center. It's a different site. And in this case, it's going to trigger that based on the effective date. So this is just a custom metadata date field that we have on our content. You can trigger by declare dates and whatnot. And we'll see in our scan capture solution, we've got a bunch of different content with different retention schedules and different triggers. So you see that whole variety will come up in our scan capture example. So we can see it'll stay in place for a year, and after that year, it's going to move to the Record Center where it will stay for 5 fiscal years, and then it'll be destroyed. So, but we're not scheduled yet because we don't have an effective date on our content. Let's just complete our scenario here. So I have a purchase agreement. I now have word that things are good to go, so I'm just going to edit my properties on that, and I'm going to change some metadata values. I'm going to give it a date, and I'm just going to change the status to executed. Again, this is just my example. I mean, your particular situation, your particular information architecture is going to be different than this. This is just an example to demonstrate the concepts of automated classification and declaration. So we'll just save that. And in my example, I have versioning turned on. Not a lot of, I shouldn't say not a lot. Some customers use versioning, some customers do not. So you can trigger what I'm going to show you just based on metadata values, or you can do it based on a combination of metadata and publishing features. So CLM is going to want me to just check this in. I'm going to check it in and publish a major version. And when I've set the status to executed, I publish a major version. Those are the criteria to make this a formal preserved record. And if I just refresh that, if we just watch up here in the word icon, now we see the lock added to that. So CLM has recognized that the criteria to become a formal preserved record is met. It has now made this an active record and has made it immutable, which means that we are unable to update or change the metadata or do any changes of that nature. It's allocated to the correct spot in the file plan automatically. And now we have the retention schedule scheduled and dates for those because we now have the proper information available on our metadata fields. So from an end user perspective, what's going on there, right? Simple, seamless, and transparent. All I needed to do is add my purchase agreement in, add business data that I know about, which is an agreement type and date and status. And behind the scenes, CLM took care of the rest. It automatically classified it to the correct place in the file plan, assigned the proper retention period, and it also declared it at the right time based on the user's business process. So pretty cool. Let's take a look just briefly behind the scenes, what kind of configurations needed to make all that happen? Well, it's not a whole lot. So I'll just pop to the records management area, our lifecycle management and configuration. We can see the file plan builder here. We've got our hierarchical file plan structure. Here's where we had purchase agreements, 210. And we can see the various kind of attributes to create those. To create a new branch within your file plan, it's just simply popping up a new record category and providing the information. For in-place records management, for record center records management, each record category is allocated a repository. So you can create a repository for each individual branch of your file plan. And when we say record center, this is where those documents go. And you could access them through here, or those documents are also available through SharePoint Search if users have the right kind of access for that. Here we can see the mapping of some metadata values to these fields. Here's where we say purchase agreement that we use in our content rules. And here's where we see the compliance policy, the agreement finance. So let's go look at the finance policy itself. Again, pretty straightforward right now. We've got some content rules that we can add to our policy. And if we take a look at these rules, it's just simply pick up a logic rule that we've got set up. Look for this content type with these values in its metadata. Bring them in just through a drop-down list. Tell CLM what you want to do when that's met. Do you want to declare this right away? Do you want to do it manually? Do you want to do it delayed? Do you want to trigger that whether it's published or on all things? So again, all simple drop-down things. You do not need programmers or developers to make these happen or to set these policies on individual libraries. You manage it in one place and it applies everywhere. Let me just pop over to the categories again, just before we leave this scenario. When we talk about the next scenario, the scan capture piece, we're going to be working with HR. And so this is just an example of where we have the kind of file codes and the file structure that we have for the HR example. We're going to be actually coming in, I just want to position for our next example, but we're going to have some things allocated to this 320 category. We're going to have some other things allocated to different areas here. And 320's got some, I just want to make sure this is brought up and empty. Sure. Awesome. Okay, so what did we see with Collabware CLM? Well, I think you'll agree, a simple, seamless, and transparent end user experience. Users didn't even need to know that records management was going on. So let's move on. And let's take a look at some scan capture stuff. So how does CLM, so that's great. We can add a document in and it comes into the correct compliance control, and that's great. But we've got, you have a lot of needs where you've got a bunch of physical paper that's getting scanned in, you've got thousands of documents, you've got a scan capture solution that's part of your overall thing to capture HR forms that are signed. How does CLM work with that stuff? Well, that's an excellent question. Let's take a look. So in this example, what I've got is, I've got really two packages of scanned documents. I think there's about 18 documents, and I don't know, 40 some pages of documents that have all been scanned and are in a big TIFF file. And there's really two employees in there, John and Marcus, and each package contains, there's some time off requests, some performance appraisals, some serious health condition reports, some payroll related forms. So a whole bunch of different stuff there. And again, a scan capture solution is often used to digitize these paper forms. And I'm not going to go over all the options for scan capture or show you all the features, but I'm just going to show you how you can get that into SharePoint. Now, with all these different forms, the interesting thing with all these is they actually have all sorts of different retention policies for those. So our compliance policies for these are time off requests are based on the declared date plus 2 years. But serious health conditions, you know what? We're supposed to keep those for 3 years, and we're supposed to keep them in the record center. We don't want to leave them on our collaboration site. Performance appraisals, on the other hand, well, you know, we keep those 3 years after they've been terminated. So we got an event-based disposition there. So the whole idea is that you could have a big bundle of scanned content, and all that content could have different rules, different kinds of content types implied, and we're going to see how we can pull that together and have all that happen nice and seamlessly. The scan capture process has a lot of steps, right? There's going to be a lot going on to get a stack of paper divided up into their separate documents with meaningful metadata. But a proper scan capture solution can make things easy. So you start with a big stack of paper documents, you get them scanned. So I've already done that. I won't go through and bore you with making the scanning noise. And in our example, you know, we've got 2 bundles, one for each employee, and each bundle has a bunch of different documents with different retention policies, as we saw. So for today's demonstration, we'll start at the point where the scanned images are on some sort of network share. And then I'm going to use Psigen capture for the demonstration today. And what it has to do is it has to actually import the files from the scanner or the file share. Then it has to do something called classify. It has to figure out what kind of documents are in there, and then do some OCR scanning to then extract the content. Really pull out the meaningful metadata, you know, index it, pull out the metadata that we care about, and really, you know, describe that document. And then finally, once it has all that stuff together, it has to migrate those documents to SharePoint with the desired extracted metadata and put them in the appropriate spot based on their content types. Once you actually get in SharePoint, then Collabware CLM is going to get hold of it. And we're going to classify the content to the correct place in the file plan. Right? We're going to declare the content a record if the criteria to become a formal preserved record has been met. And in this case, these are some paper records, so they're already records, and we want them to be declared as soon as they get added into the environment. We're going to determine where they're supposed to be declared records, whether they're in place or in the record center. And we're going to start the clock ticking on some of the disposition if needed. So depending on it, if it's event-based, that if the events happen, that's great. Then we'll start the clock to tick. If not, then the clock will not start ticking. And then finally, based on those rules, we'll disposition content that's completed its life cycle. So those could either be destroyed, made permanent, or transferred. In our example today, I don't have a time machine to show you the the destruction processes. So we're just going to go to the point where everything gets classified and declared and put in the right spot. So, and the interesting thing is that all this stuff at the bottom, you're not going to need to lift a finger to make that happen. So let's take a look and see what's going to go on. Let me bring up my environment again. So first, let's get just positioned in my demo environment for this. So I'm going to pop over to my HR area, and I've got a library I've just called the Scan Drop-Off Library. The scan capture solution can put things in different libraries, you know, when it migrates, but for the sake of this demonstration, I've just had it throw everything, all the content types, all the variety of stuff into this one area. So just to make it easier to see. So I have that right there. And the other thing I want to bring up is, here's my employee files. This is inside the record center. And you can see there's nothing here. Right now, there's nothing in my scan drop-off library either. So I just want to position those for the future. So now I'm going to bring up my Psigen capture solution. So in this particular case, the first step that I want to do is, so this is Psigen capture is a desktop software. And the first thing I want to do is actually go and bring up those scanned images that we've got going on. And to do that, the first thing that happens is it asks me to, you know, pick a particular profile. So what kind of configuration profile they want to have. Now this was set up ahead of time. This really describes, what am I looking for in the content? What types of documents am I looking for? What types of metadata I'm looking for? So that's something that gets kind of configured for you. And it really doesn't change once it's set up unless you have new forms or new content that's being pulled in, or you've got different kinds of values that are going on. So I'm not going to go through the details of how you set up that configuration, but suffice to say, it's all set up to recognize a number of HR forms. So I'm just going to pick that one. And it's going to ask me to go find some documents to bring into my environment. So I'm going to do that. So I've got a couple here. I'm going to select them up and then just say start the capture. So the first thing it does is it asks me for a batch number. It creates a batch number, which is great. And the default one's fine, so I'm just going to OK that. And at this point, the migration process is going to start. It's going to start, well, not the migration, the import process. It takes about 30 seconds to go through here, but basically it's looking at that TIFF file. It's really pulling apart all the stuff, all the various documents that are in there. So it doesn't really know what's if it's a 4-page document or a 3-page document, it doesn't really know that kind of stuff. So it pulls it all apart. And then the next step is going to put it back together based on the forms, how many pages they're in, and stuff like that. This is also a good opportunity to do a little QA on things as well. So you can actually see the scanned image. You can determine if there's some problems with it or whatnot, and then rectify that by rescanning or whatnot. You can see we have no metadata assigned. You see in this profile, there's certain kinds of metadata that we look for, employee names, social security numbers, things of that nature. So we haven't populated any metadata values yet. So once I have the content brought in, that's great. I just want to go to the next step. So I'm just going to say done. And now I'm going to go to the classification area. It really just says, do I want to close this and go to the next step in the workflow? Yep. And at this stage, Psigen is really looking at the content. It's doing some OCR on that, trying to interpret and describe that content in a meaningful way. This takes a little bit longer. And it's actually going to then try and repackage those pages back together in their meaningful documents. It's going to look for some of the stuff is like type kind of images it's going to extract. Other OCR stuff is going to be handwritten things it's going to pull out. So it has a lot of capabilities in that area. I should also point out that this whole process can be scripted as well to run in a bit of an automated way, but you should actually consider having a QA step in there as well. It's always good to have a QA step to at least review the quality of the scanned images. And again, the particular process, depending on the scan capture solution that you have, you'll work out what the best kind of automation process is for that. So at this point, we can see that it's now interpreted all of that content, and we can see we've now populated certain metadata values here. As we click on each one of those metadata values down on the left side, we can see exactly where it's actually drawn from. And this is an example of where we've got a signature date. We've got handwritten signature date that Psigen's been able to interpret and actually pull into metadata value. I'm not sure if it'll actually get my signature because I can barely read my signature myself, but you can do handwritten interpretation as well. I also know that there's one little problem on a document down here. Most times if there's some sort of problem with a document, it's going to run through and it'll tell you at the end. It'll put all the documents in except this one and flag it as errors, but I don't have enough time to walk through a full error cycle, so I'm just going to correct this right now. So you can see in this example, Psigen was able to interpret all these other dates, start dates, end dates, but the return date, that's got an extra field out there, the 014. So I'm just going to manually type that and correct that over top. So 0105 2014. So that's another option that through the quality check, you can have it run and flag for mandatory things if they don't exist, and you have the option to then override or correct that information right from the interface itself. Okay. And we can see all the various kinds of documents there and where it has pulled out the metadata, time off requests, serious health condition reports. So the next step is just to have that be done. So I'm just going to say, okay, now I'm done that. And the next step is really a migration piece. And before I start that, what I want to do is I just want to bring that over on the left side. I'm going to bring up some side-by-side stuff. And where's my drop-off library? There we go. Just bear with me for a second. So what we're going to see is we're going to see all this content, when I say done, be migrated into the drop-off library. It's all going to go in this one spot, but remember, we have a couple of policies that say, do not keep these documents in the collaboration site. Move them to the record center. So what we're going to see is some documents will come in here, be added in here by the scan capture solution, but then CLM is going to recognize that those belong somewhere else, and they're just going to take them and move them to this place in the record center. So let's start that process right now. So it goes through and really by each type of document that we have in our configuration, it's looking at those and it's migrating those over. Again, you could have each of these being pushed to different libraries. Just for this example, I've got them all going to one. Right? Here we see some libraries being added in, some documents, and this is the FMLA document. So we got a few in there right now. We see the little lock icon being put on. Things are being declared right now. CLM is recognizing the content and doing what it needs to do. Hasn't moved these ones out just yet. It will momentarily. We see the scan capture solution processing all of those, adding those into SharePoint. And then when this just finishes up, then we'll bring full screen. So there's a lot going on here. And really the key message here is that the reality is you do have a big bundle of documents. You don't really want to do a lot of pre-sorting and pre-organizing. You just want to take all the stuff, put it in a hopper, have the scanning configuration, figure out what's in there, where it is. And then when it gets put into SharePoint, have your compliance tool recognize all the big bundle of stuff that's there and put them all in the right spot. You don't have to do a lot of manual stuff. Okay. So we can see a few things. There's still one FMLA there, but let's pop over to our record center and let's just refresh that. Where's our employee files? Oh, it's pending records. What are we doing? And let's expand that so we can all see it a little bit better. So we can see that content was added into a drop-off library. CLM recognized based on its rules that this kind of content needed to be moved, so it automatically moved it to the record center right away. Here we can see there's a certain kind of policy for the FMLA stuff. Let's take a look at lifecycle details. Lifecycle details is kept based on the record declared date plus 3 years. It's all been made an active record, immutable. It is now under the proper compliance control policy, and it's going to be destroyed in 3 years according to this policy. We have performance appraisals that are in the same place in the file plan. They're under employee files as well. But let's take a look at their details. Again, active record, immutable, but they have a different policy. CLM can provide different policies based on your content, even if it's in the same record category. You don't have to, you're not limited by like a one-to-one match. So recognize that these are performance appraisals, and performance appraisals have a completely different retention policy based on a termination event and not a declare date. Let's go back to the drop-off library itself. So I hope that's not too small, but we can see, right? We've got some naming that's happened. Again, this is part of the configuration in your scan capture. You can configure how you want to structure the name of the document. In this case, it was using a date, the form type, and the employee name. But it's pushed out, it's recognized and added to a particular content type. It's allocated things to the correct place in the file plan. Here we can see, some content was allocated to 320 employees, others was allocated to the R9 or time off request sections or payroll files. We've extracted employee name metadata or social security number as appropriate. Some of these content types don't have medical providers, some do. So all that stuff's been automatically extracted and pulled out. So that's pretty amazing if you really think about what's gone on there. Let's just sort of sum up and take a look at what happened. If we really had about 18 documents all scanned together in a bunch, big bunch of paper documents, right? So how many mouse clicks did it take to get those scans imported, separated, tagged, and loaded into SharePoint? There was maybe 6 clicks. And how many mouse clicks to actually bring all those documents under the proper compliance control? 0. Right? Your specific situation is going to be a bit different. But I think this really shows you what's possible. And you know what? I think that's pretty cool. So let's just sum up. Again, we got about a minute to go. I apologize for the little extra time. So what did we talk about today? Well, hygiene is a set of practices performed for the preservation of health. Just like your personal health, your information requires hygiene, and starting with a healthy information lifestyle will help prevent future problems from occurring. Implement retention and disposition policies from the start. Don't let your SharePoint environment become a digital landfill you have to clean up later on. With SharePoint as your foundation and complemented with a few best-of-breed solutions, you can achieve full enterprise content management program. Compared with traditional standalone solutions from IBM, ENC, and OpenText, enterprise content management using SharePoint will give you greater value because the license cost for best-of-breed approach is going to be less than the cost of traditional solutions, licensing, and infrastructure and hardware. You can also avoid costly specialized resources and really focus your IT resources on SharePoint technologies. You can provide more flexibility. SharePoint is a platform that you can build on. And if you need specialized workflow or integration with an enterprise, an ERP, then you can do that with SharePoint. And it also provides increased compliance by using an environment that people are already using for collaboration and information sharing. You reduce training needs, you automatically bring content under the correct compliance control, and it is simple, seamless, and transparent to the end user. And the end result is increased overall compliance and reduced risk for your organization. As long as there are meaningful content types and metadata, Collabware CLM looks for the right conditions and automatically applies the correct compliance policies. Start with Collabware CLM managing retention and disposition policies, and then add in the other ECM components as your business priorities dictate. Oh, and did I say 0 clicks to bring your content under policy control, your proper policy control policies? So how do I get on board? Well, give us a call and we can talk. Let's talk further with you about your unique needs and requirements, and perhaps a proof of concept is something that might be something that you need. We offer a great hosted proof of concept where you can actually try stuff out yourself. You can prove it for yourself. This stuff is behaving and working the way you need it.